Hey guys, so I thought it'd be a cool idea to make a video about Cybertron. And no, I'm not talking about the home planet of the Autobots from Transformers. You fucking nerds. No, but in all seriousness, I am actually talking about what could have been the almost first sister series to Power Rangers known as Cybertron. And I'm sure a lot of you probably haven't heard of this because it almost never happened. Now, here's the history of it. The whole video is just going to be about history, first off. So, Cybertron is what VR Troopers eventually became. And those who don't know what VR Troopers is the first official sister series to Power Rangers, following three teenagers who assume the powers of these metal heroes who also are part of a virtual reality world, and they fight the evil Grim Lord. And that's the basic gist. It's basically Power Rangers, but here's the thing. What this show started as is incredibly fascinating. I'm sure Power Ranger fans know that eventually at some point in Season 1, Tommy had to give up his Green Ranger coin, to which he gave to Jason. And for story's sake, Tommy was obviously out of the show for a long time. But eventually near the end of the first season, he did come back. But for reasons that you wouldn't think. Because in between the times when he left and came back, he was working on his own show, this show being Cybertron. But the show only existed as a 7-minute pilot and eventually got scrapped and was changed into VR Troopers. The series stars Jason David Frank, who played Tommy on Power Rangers, but in this show he's known as Adam Steele, which is a pretty kick-ass name first off. Years pass after the disappearance of his father, and he's eventually old enough to earn the opportunity to find out the true secret about his father and where he went. This earns him the power of Cybertron. And I'm sure a lot of you know that Power Rangers is based off a Japanese show called Super Sentai, but Cybertron was based on a sister series to Super Sentai called Metal Hero, specifically the season titled Superhuman Machine Metalder. The difference between the two is that Metal Hero came out about 10 years or so later, and instead of focusing on a whole team of heroes, it focuses on one powerful hero who, his suit is like made of metal, is a little more bulkier than the average Ranger. In this case, Metalder uses a sword, and obviously physical prowess too, but there's got to be some difference. And actually, if you're a hardcore Power Rangers fan, this pilot is quite interesting with how it relates to other seasons. More specifically, what this season did and eventually couldn't do was a move to future seasons of Power Rangers and a little bit of VR Troopers. Obvious things is that Cybertron is not even called Cybertron anymore, but is instead the leader of the VR Troopers. And he's not played by Jason David Frank, he's played by Brad Hawkins, who plays Ryan Steele as opposed to Adam Steele. And I guess by chance they used Adam was eventually used for Adam, the replacement for Zach, the Black Power Ranger. Plus, Brad Hawkins was also an uncredited voice of Trey from Power Rangers Zeo. And also, VR Troopers is kind of like a staple of the 90s, the fact that it involves virtual reality, because that was a big experimental thing in the mid to early 90s. And they just went with it for fuck if I know, but Cybertron just kind of stuck like its own thing. Like, it's just kind of like a high-powered robot, and it was more so, it wasn't just a robot. More specifically, the VR Troopers had these little crystals that actually I still have a toy of. They had these little things that gave them powers to become VR Troopers, which is kind of like having Morphin. But here, there was Adam Steele, and there was a robot known as Psychon, who was just kind of like an android that his father made, and when fused together with a certain crystal, possibly a future reference to a Zeo crystal, he combined mind and body and became Cybertron. So that alone was an interesting thing, yet I feel like VR Troopers really butchered what this could have been. Because what made Cybertron unique is that it wasn't like a whole team of people, it was one guy taking on all these enemies. And like the fact that VR Troopers aren't even part of the same season, like okay, they're still from Metal, like all the heroes that you see, they're from the Metal Hero franchise, but from 3 different ones. In fact, like Superhuman Machine Metalder, that's what Cybertron or what Ryan Steele became in VR Troopers. But then there's one called Dimensional Warrior Spielband, which features 2 metal heroes. One's a female, one's a male, and that eventually those became Caitlin Starr and JB Reese. And even when they ran out of footage in season 2, Metalder was placed with someone called Space Sheriff Shader, which was supposedly, it was an upgrade, but it was still like, oh, this is not the same thing. So it kind of diminishes really what could have been a unique change to Saban, and also it made a lot of weird and unnecessary changes to Cybertron. Obviously, Jason David Frank playing Adam Steele, who you can just recognize as Tommy. Tao Chung, who is his sensei, who's also the sensei to the VR Troopers, played by the same actor. And also a character who I don't think was ever in the show named Mia, who is Tao's daughter. And what's weird about this certain change is that Tao doesn't know the VR Troopers' identities. However, in Cybertron, he's the one that gives Adam his powers. So it's kind of a weird change, and instead, he was replaced by Professor Hart, who was just trapped in a computer, who could look like he could give less of a shit that he's in this. But Tao in this could have been to Adam Steele what Splinter is to the Ninja Turtles, and I kind of think it would have worked. But also Mia, and that would have been kind of like an interesting dynamic, but no, we don't get that. Like, who knows, Mia could have been somebody who works like the person who's the guy in the chair, or someone who helps when he needs to change, or, you know, the one that works on the ground when he's out in the sky fighting Grimlord. One of the more obvious things that they changed from Cybertron to now is that the Cybertron theme eventually became the theme song to the Green Ranger. They changed 2 words around, it's literally the same damn thing. And a part that's just kind of really stealing and copying from Power Rangers are the Bulk and Skull throwaway jokes, Elmo and Scuzzy. You know, they served as the comic relief same way Bulk and Skull would, but you cannot, like, do something. You cannot copy Bulk and Skull, okay? Bulk and Skull are wholesome, and they are amazing. They're like the best characters in the show. In my opinion, one of the best. They're just amazing. And oddly enough, Elmo was played by Jamie Kennedy, who would go on to do such wonderful films as Malibu's Most Wanted and Son of the Mask. Yippee-ki-yay. And as before, the power between Adam Steele and Psychon is the Psychon Crystal, which obviously would later be used as the Zeo Crystal that gives the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers the powers to become the Zeo Rangers in Season 4. And obviously you'd have things that you'd see Tommy do in Power Rangers, same as here, where he's just like, you know, in a martial arts contest and all that stuff. In fact, he'd probably have the same exact character, and honestly, that's what Jason David Frank does best. He plays Tommy, like, to a T. You guys know he kicks ass, okay? And even though he's basically just Tommy in this, it would have been nice to see him interact with Mia more, you know, unlike where he was just kissing on Kimberly the whole time, and just having a regular mutual friendship between him and another girl. Because honestly, it was rare to see Tommy with that in the series. And, you know, obviously Adam has daddy issues, just like Ryan from VR Troopers. But obviously Cybertron wasn't greenlit, and Jason David Frank eventually came back to play Tommy in later first season of Power Rangers, back as the Green Ranger, and eventually White Ranger, Red Ranger, Black Ranger, you get the gist. He was just so popular, you couldn't take him away from that show and have everyone be okay with it. And as soon as he came back, the Cybertron theme became Go Green Ranger. And obviously Cybertron became VR Troopers, and you know the story from there. But Cybertron was really interesting because it's like, why did they change so much? And if they did continue making this, how different would Power Rangers be nowadays? I honestly cannot imagine Power Rangers being as successful as it was without Tommy. Not saying the show wasn't good, but he was just the cornerstone, what made... You know, he survived so many seasons because everybody loved him. He was kick-ass, you know. He was the tape that bonded the series and kept it alive. You know, until Turbo came around, and then Space Rangers are going to save the day, and you know. But another interesting thing to consider is that if this show actually was greenlit, could it have been better than VR Troopers? Honestly, possibly. But something that VR Troopers did that took from Cybertron is that they made the show not unique anymore, because now you got like 3 metal heroes that are fighting this bad guy, when it was interesting just to see one. And you know, they did the same thing with Beetleborg, so I guess they just kind of did that later and be like, oh shit, we could have done this the whole time, but they didn't, and that's kind of stupid. But honestly, Cybertron is something special. It's an interesting topic of discussion for Power Ranger fans like myself. And if you were to ask me if I'd be okay with this as opposed to VR Troopers coming out, I'd be like, hey, you know, why the hell not? I'd like to see the difference that they make, because obviously they just gave up kind of experiment. You know, Beetleborgs lasted about 2 seasons, as well as VR Troopers, but everyone was so inclined to Power Rangers. Everyone just liked that one more. It was the hit, and those 2 were just kind of the miss. Unless you count Mystic Knights of Turnanog, which is the most original thing they did, and maybe I'll cover for a future video, but for now, Cybertron exists as a relic that only us Power Ranger fans will remember. Who knows, maybe if greenlit, it could have been more than more phenomenal.